in some companies is withdrawal even above the requirements of sanctions. Companies are moving before they're being asked to move. Now, the third thing really then to say is we need to gather the evidence, and it's very important that, and acknowledge the work around war crimes research that the government is doing at the moment, and the first trial that's already underway in Ukraine now, that we get the facts, we document the abuses, the genocide, the international criminal violations that have taken place in the country. We need to create an evidence base for what are economic measures. But we're having, over recent weeks in the Congress and all around the world, particularly in the West, big discussions now around what it means to target individuals versus whole populations. Who are the real violators? Who are the innocent? Are there any innocent in the context of Russia? Gross violations versus serious violations. And essential goods and services, medicines and food, should they be exempt from sanction regimes? Now, the short term, I think, is clearer. The long-term consequences of where we're going are less clear. A lot of this is trade distorting. Are we actually talking, if we think about all of these measures and everything that's happening, about the end of global free trade in the way we've discussed over the past 30 years at Davos and elsewhere? These broad-based sanctions, when do they become boycotts? When do we elaborate these rules of the road that boards and companies can use to decide when there's a fact-based approach to withdrawing from the Russian market? So I'll just end by saying three things, and I think, Eric, you said some of these things already. Be precise, the first thing. Be really precise. State the objectives, whether you're a government or a business, as to why you're disengaging from the Russian market. Cite your rationale within international law, human rights, corruption. Be very clear about why you're doing it. The second is to measure and evaluate. Beware of unintended consequences. And Eric, you've mentioned the diminishment of leverage over time in the context of Iran, possibly. How do we know in the medium to long term that the path we're walking down is actually having the purpose we intended? Magnitsky, again, allows us to measure the consequences in the terms of specific individuals. Broad-based sanctions, you're measuring the impact on a whole population. Beware of unintended consequences. And third, for boards, for corporate boards, and today we launched a report for boards in terms of their impacts on affected stakeholders. Whatever your decision, make sure that you put at the center the impact on the human being. So if you're withdrawing from the Russian market, make sure you're doing so responsibly. Responsible exit and responsible entry are key factors here in the discussion. Cutting and running, leaving staff and others in harm's way is no way to behave. So responsibility comes whatever your decision. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I'm not so far getting much flow of questions on the Slido gadget. So if you do have questions, please start winding them up. I see a range here. I'm tempted to just put one to First Deputy Prime Minister. And it's, I think, the question that hangs in the room in a meeting that we are having in Europe. And it's uncomfortable perhaps to talk about because we don't have a representative of the EU or in fact of Europe up on the panel here, but it's impossible, I think, to avoid the question. If we go beyond the formalities of cutting Russia out of the international system, if we're talking about concretely depriving them of access to the bit of the world economy that matters most, it is the European energy market that's decisive. And I don't know whether you feel free at this point to say something on that score, but I think it would be very good to get the message from Kyiv this morning on that issue that is being debated all over the continent.
Mm-hmm. So I think actually it's essential for us, and there is no other answer than that we are insisting on providing sanction. I know that I think all countries in EU are prepared this second package of sanction, and there are discussion inside. But we insist that this package should be implemented. Otherwise, there won't be. We're discussing. We have very complicated discussion, and there is going to be some complex question, I think, in this audience. But the question is, we will understand that sanction works just in case if this invasion will stop. Otherwise, there is no sense to discuss this partial sanction, like SWIFT, or partial sanction on ban of oil and gas. If the war is continuous, it means that sanction does not work at all. That's why we insist on the decision from EU side. We understand that I know from their side they try to estimate how costly it's going to be for their economy. But from other side, there is Ukraine. We're sitting in a good audience with you, in a good room, and in parallel there is war landscape. It's a real war, and Ukraine economy loses every day, and we loses our people, and that's why I think that there is no other answer than EU should launch the second package of sanctions and to ban the possibility to purchase oil and gas from Russia.
Thank you for that.
That I think it's
If I could add on to that, because it is important. In short, our adversaries, and certainly in this case Putin and those that we're targeting, must understand that we are not bluffing in this. And the multilateral concept of everyone pulling together in this is absolutely key. We must have a commitment to impose severe costs to those who threaten our international stability and security. So messaging is important. It is, but the coming together is important. And as I said, in terms of energy, I mean, it's tough. We look at the SWIFT sanctions that are out there, but you look at those that are not included in that, Schmierbank or Gazprom. This must be a very holistic thing, and we must find other sources for Europe. I believe the U.S. would be a wonderful source for LNG and for energy to Europe. So I offer that once again. So
I've got a gentleman here with glasses. Yes. Yes.
Ken Roth from Human Rights Watch. I wanted to pick up on John's comments because I think it's very important that we distinguish between the Russian government, the Kremlin, the military on the one hand, and the Russian people on the other. Because if you look at what's going to stop the atrocities, what's going to stop the invasion, arguably the Russian people are the most important. And despite the censorship, despite the disinformation, despite the 15-year prison terms threatened, there have been anti-war demonstrations in 150 cities across Russia. Putin is terrified of the possibility of a color revolution. And so it's important with the sanctions messaging and the reality to make clear that the Russian people are not the targets, because we want them to see that they can join with this anti-atrocity, anti-war message. Second quick point is that the most targeted sanction is prosecution. And the most effective institution here is the International Criminal Court. Now, the US government traditionally has said the International Criminal Court cannot prosecute anybody, even on the territory like Ukraine, which has accepted the court, if the war crime suspect, if his or her country has not joined the ICC. Now, Biden has changed that with respect to Ukraine, said it's okay to prosecute Russians even though Russia has not joined the ICC. But legislation in the US is still precluding full US cooperation with the International Criminal Court. And I hope, Representative Wagner, that you will join with current legislative efforts to allow full US cooperation with the International Criminal Court, even though theoretically the ICC at some point could prosecute an American or prosecute an Israeli. Those are not good enough reasons to block cooperation with the ICC today on Ukraine.
Thank you very much, Ken, for that very pointed intervention. Could I ask whether or not, Deputy Prime Minister, you accept that distinction between the government and the people in Russia? Is that a logic that you follow in Kyiv in your understanding of how these sanctions should work? Because it's a classic liberal version. It's an argument that goes all the way back to the sanctioning of Iraq, at least, and if not before. It relies on focusing on oligarchs as one of the main mechanisms, or the political leadership. Is that, from your experience as a country at war, a meaningful distinction at this point?
We have in this room our deputies from Kyiv, and they raise their hand, and they would like to answer that question, Yulia Klimenko, if you don't mind.
Hello, I'm Yulia Klimenko. I'm a member of Parliament of Ukraine, and I would like to answer this question. When you're saying about the difference between Russian nation which is destroyed de facto by Putin, by himself. And Russian Kremlin government, tell me, the soldier that raped 2 years old kid, he is Russian or not? Yes, he is Russian, and he is a part of Russian nation. And the Russian nation should be responsible for Kremlin that they actually elected, and they are supporting 75% of Russian supporting murders of Ukraine. What we are talking about here? About what values, economic development and growth in Europe we are talking? If we allowed 70%, 75%, it's official polls. It's not, I'm not taking it from my head. Accept and actually prove, and they, how to say it, even agree with the killing of Ukrainians. This nation, unfortunately, will be destroyed by his own government and his own president, by Putin. We are not destroying Russians. They are destroying themselves, and they will do it by the end, unfortunately. And we will fight by the end.
Thank you very much for that powerful statement, which I think exposes a really quite fundamental conflict here. I would love to get your reaction, Anne, to the issue of the ICC.
I will say this, that the culpability rests squarely on exclusively, especially in the case of Russia and Ukraine, and with other targets, with the regimes that would see their citizens suffer, rather than risk the development of connections between the people and the outside world. You know, we do these in a comprehensive plan to ensure humanitarian efforts are also out there, but they continue to be impeded. Putin is a man that is not only is bombing hospitals and schools and citizens, he has blocked the humanitarian corridors. It is unheard of in a war of this sort to block those kinds of corridors. The war crimes are absolutely, I think, key, and I think it is oftentimes, sadly, authoritarian regimes that will compound the pain of their people and denying them that kind of access. So we look forward to seeing. I think the first. We saw the first war crime prosecution just maybe this past week. Is that correct?
Gentlemen, yes. I'm going to take 2 questions bundled, so I'll come forward to the lady in Herigmone.
Professor Tusa, I'm resisting the temptation to ask you the question because it's a question about the financial impact of the sanctions. Do we know how useful are the euros and the dollars the Russians are getting for European energy? Because as we know, the central bank cannot handle that money. So do we suspect, do we have reason to believe that Russia is creating slush funds, or is it useful to receive those euros and dollars just to stabilize the foreign exchange and avoid hyperinflation? I think this goes to the bottom line, whether or not we should pass sanctions on the energy.
Thank you. And then at the front here.
Thank you so much. Mina Lurabi, The National. I just want to talk about sanctions and take a step back and thank you for raising Iraq. I'm originally from Iraq. I wanted to ask about sanctions on Iraq. So Iraq withdrew from Kuwait and the sanctions continued from 1991 until 2003. And then the Saddam Hussein regime was removed by an American-led invasion. So what lessons have we learned from how sanctions were used in Iraq? And was that a strategy or a tactic? And what benefit was it to the eventual end of changing character and how Iraq acted? And when we talk about, of course, the impact on international law and order and peace and security, what you think the impact of the 2003 decision in Iraq had on some of the dimensions we're seeing now with the Ukraine invasion.
Thank you so much. I'm going to bring one more in, Ricardo Hausbill at the front here. And then we'll wrap, and we've got our eye on the time here.
Thank you, a fascinating panel. Thank you for your words and your courage. I have a question regarding energy sanctions. The world obviously is undergoing a period of high oil prices, and and people are concerned about energy security, energy affordability. And on the other hand, Europe has been hesitant about being more aggressive, and they've postponed, say, adjustment for some future, but the war is now, it's not in the future. You want to have an impact now, not later. So I have argued that the most effective way to sanction Russia is not to embargo its oil, but to tax it. Russian oil needs to compete with oil from other parts that's not taxed, so they will have to eat the tax. And it shouldn't wait, that it's just a matter of imposing a tax on Russian oil and to use that money for many good things, for the reconstruction of Ukraine, for helping the Ukrainian refugees, for helping Ukraine defense. Mm-hmm. So just tax the oil and tax it now. I must say that I read recently in Reuters that Secretary Yellen was pushing for that idea in the G7, but I think that it should be put on the table. Tax Russian oil now.
Thank you. Can I ask, is that an option that would be attractive to Kyiv as a solution? It has on the one hand a revenue-raising element. It has on the other hand a rather liberal feel in the sense that if you still wanted to buy Russian oil, you could, and it would be the Russians that paid the penalty. Does that do the work that you would like to see from sanctions at this point?
Actually, I absolutely agree that for us, for sanction, it's important to have impact right now, and we have our internal discussion, and we also consider this possibility to have a double, extra taxation on the Russian oil and gas. But from Kyiv point of view, from official point of view, so I think that number one, it's ban of export of oil and gas. So it's our answer. We also have representative of Naftogaz, the CEO of Naftogaz. Also, I think that he can comment. Yuri Vitrenko, if you don't mind.
Excellent. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Just speak loud.
So
yes.
Just speak in the tone.
It's not even an alternative. So we are looking for a combination to complete that embargo. And a special duty, and again, some kind of escrow account mechanism that can be implemented through financial sanctions. And I will explain what I mean. So there are countries that can afford at the moment to implement a full embargo. For example, even like Germany in terms of oil, they're saying, look, now we're ready for a full embargo on oil, but we're not ready for a full embargo of a Russian pipeline gas, for example. People will freeze. Hungary is saying, look, we're not ready for embargo on Russian oil because, again, that's the only source of oil we can get because we don't have a seaport. So there can be a combination when, for example, some countries are saying, look, there is a full embargo. Not some countries. We're saying, as a general rule, it's a full embargo. Then there are some exemptions as a transitional arrangement. For those countries who cannot implement the full embargo right now, they have to use a special duty for example, pipeline oil or for pipeline gas, where it's really like their critical dependence. We will also test, by the way, if they are sincere about saying that they have a critical dependence. Because maybe with a special duty, we will all see that Russian oil is not just competitive, for example, in Hungary. So maybe some Hungarian firms, they just want a free ride, again, on this huge discount, for example, to Russian oil that we see at the moment. A similar situation, for example, with escrow account mechanism. We can say that even if you are buying Russian oil and gas, you cannot transfer all the money to Putin's regime. So at least some part of this money should be frozen, seized. Again, it's a different story, or there can be options basically, but at least we should deprive Putin regime of these billions of dollars he's getting every day from Europe to finance this barbaric war.
Thank you so much.
Because when people are arguing about different options, it's an excuse for them to do nothing. And that's exactly what is happening at the moment.
We could spend all morning talking. We've had an incredibly rich and complex discussion this morning. We're out of time, but I feel it's entirely appropriate to leave the last word this morning to the Ukrainian voice. And so I'll ask you to thank all the contributors to this wonderful panel to join me in a round of applause. Thank you for being here. Thanks very much for the discussion.
Okay, thank you.